Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. We're going to continue looking at the transition from literal to spiritual Israel as illustrated in the book of Isaiah, demonstrated however you want to look at it. But before we do, let's have a word of prayer. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we invite once again your presence as we open your word. We are so thankful that we can have this time in the morning to study and to receive light. We think about all the things that are happening in this world, in our lives, and the way that you have ordered events for us personally, and these events globally to align with your word. And so we ask, Lord, that we can submit to your instruction, that we can be corrected intellectually and spiritually. And so we invite your Holy Spirit to do that work upon us, to reveal to us from the scriptures the things that it revealed to the prophets in the past. And we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we have all of these different oracles and burdens that we're looking at, and we can see that there is these references to different events in which these different nations had been involved, and that these are used as illustrations for things that are going to happen at the end of the world. That is, the purpose of this, even though some of these things are things that are going to happen then, it's really about the end of the world. Now, when it comes to this idea of spiritual Israel, which we dealt with in chapters 9 and 11 of Romans, we skipped over there for a little bit. How do we relate this idea that these prophecies are related to the end of the world, but they aren't referring to literal Israel? So we're saying that Isaiah is taking these and putting them at the end of the world. He's moving from the events that are happening there. And then we're saying that when they're at the end of the world, it's not talking about literal Israel. So what is our reasoning behind it so far in what we've done in these studies? How have we said, well, because it's not literal events, because they're typical, we're saying that it's spiritual Israel, not literal Israel. Do we have a basis for that so far in the book of Isaiah, right? Specifically, I'm talking about, because we could use lots of other examples. But is there something that we've shown that this is referring not to literal Israel fulfilling these prophecies at the end of the world, but spiritual Israel? Anything in Isaiah gives us that information.
I'm not really understanding your question.
Okay, so we understand that we're taking the prophecies here that are talking about literal Israel in the book of Isaiah, and we're saying these are fulfilled by spiritual Israel at the end of the world, right? That is, he sometimes, he starts with local events, but then he transitions into, eschatology, the end of the world, right? Because they're obviously not fulfilled literally in the time that he's speaking of, right? Now, we're saying, well, connected to that is the idea that it's not literal Israel that's fulfilling those prophecies at the end of the world. Because we know dispensationalists, some evangelicals, will say literal Israel has to be saved by these prophecies. So when it talks about the gathering of Israel, that must be literal Israel. Can't be this thing called spiritual Israel. That is, there are many Christians who don't believe in spiritual Israel. They believe there's Gentiles and Israel. Israel is separate. Now then there are some like messianic sort of Christians who believe that we have to become Jews in order to be saved, right? So that would be the people who are what's the word? I can't think of the word right now. Judaizers, simple word, right? That we have to become Jews in order to be saved. But many just say, we're just Gentiles. We don't have to become Jews, right? So this is part of discussion that occurs within some branches of evangelical Christianity, where you got the ones who are just like we're Gentiles, we don't have to follow any of the law. That would be the extreme. They don't have to really keep any of the law. They're just saved by grace. They just believe in Jesus and they're saved. And then you have another group that says, that we have to be grafted into, the wild, or into the natural olive tree or whatever. That we have to become Jews. They look at the olive tree in Romans as not as Christ, but as Judaism. So we have all these different views, but we're in the book of Isaiah here, and we were saying that Isaiah uses this transition from literal to spiritual, and that is events that happen literally. So we're saying that when they're fulfilled at the end of the world, they're not fulfilled by literal Israel, but by spiritual Israel. Is there anything in Isaiah that we've seen so far that tells us this? Is it just being hinted at?
Wouldn't verse 3 tell you that?
Okay, so the fortress shall cease from Ephraim and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria, they shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. Okay, so you're saying that here, because we're dealing with Gentiles, that is the Syrians, that their glory is going to be like the glory of the children of Israel. So that somehow,
that sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah. So somehow that there is included in the promises to Israel, there are hinted at promises to the nations, to the Gentiles. We saw that in some of the earlier ones. I can't remember exactly where. I think it was dealing with Philistia. Was it here? What was it here? So this is more a judgment against Philistia. And here, so you're going to look at Babylon and Philistia as both these enemies. Now, some of these other ones, of course, is it the restoration of Jacob here? I'm going to remember. Anyway, there were some other places where, I don't see it. Maybe it was in this other section. But anyway, we could see there in that verse, that third verse, there's sort of this implication. So we have, so that's one thing. So the other thing, though, is we do have this prophecy. So, and so I don't say that in Isaiah that you explicitly have this idea, you maybe see it later in Isaiah, but so far we haven't seen explicitly that, literal Israel is typical of spiritual Israel. It hasn't said that explicitly, as far as I can see. It's hinted at it, but where we see, of course, the main thing is this prophecy in Isaiah 7, right? So the prophecy about Isaiah 7 gives us these two lines. Now, the 25:20 by itself is not going to give you the transition from literal to spiritual. It's going to give you the prophecy, but in Isaiah itself, unless, we take some of the other stories and we understand that the things that happen aforetime happen for our learning, their types and so forth, and we can then infer from that. But it's really going to be the prophecies of Daniel and some other prophecies that are going to help us to understand this transition from literal to spiritual Israel. So it's just something I wanted to point out, because I keep saying that, we have spiritual Israel at the end because we have this being fulfilled spiritually, that is figuratively, they're types, and the antitype. In order to see that this is referring not to literal Israel, we do need lots more evidence, right? That is, Isaiah itself isn't telling you that explicitly. Okay. It is giving this starting point for the 22520s. And of course, we know that literal Israel is going to be scattered and not gathered, right? That is, there are some people who take the 2520 and they take the scattering of literal Israel or Judah, and then they're going to take 20 years and they're going to put it to, 1948, right? They're going to figure out how to do that. So they do a lot of, arbitrary picking of events, because they have to pick an event that's going to fit. And then they also have bizarre ways in which they count 20 years. I probably should dig up some of these examples. I don't know if I still find them, but back in 2000, I guess it'd be 2011 and 2012, when I really started digging into the chronology and reading all the different things about the 2520, that you run across these evangelical interpretations of 20 years, and you would see this math where they try to take, how would they do that? I'm trying to think. So they would take 20 years, but it wasn't just, solar years. And it wasn't just that they were taking prophetic years, like they weren't just saying 20 by 360 equals this, and we're going to count that many days sort of thing. They weren't really using days in the way that we would do it. So I should dig up some of that stuff because it's quite interesting. But it was rather, it's not just that it's complicated or even convoluted. It's just that it was not correct. Like, it did not actually work. That is, they're not going to use days literally, right? They're going to figure out these number of days and figure this out. And then they just apply it to years. So they're not going to do it to the day, right? So normally, if I'm counting days, I'm going to count days, right? Like, I'm not going to just say days and then say, well, this many days fits this many years. So they were doing all of these conversions to fit it to some particular event, but yet only to the year. And even then, I believe, later on looking at the history, they actually had the wrong year to start. So they had to fudge the beginning. They had to fudge the history of the Bible. That is, they weren't taking the reality of biblical chronology or historical evidence to get their starting point in the first place. And yet it still wasn't very precise because they didn't have a date to count from. They just had a year, and even the year was wrong. So, but the point that I'm making is the 2520 itself needs a transition in order to go from for everything to be spiritual. Now, when I deal with the prophetic mirror, I take this in Isaiah 7, where you have the riddle, right? And that we see mirrored at the beginning of this. I'll show you the prophetic mirror. So let's see it. So this is what I had worked out. Back when I'm trying to think exactly. So 2011, I came to understand the prophetic mirror in a simplified form, not the complex form. And then it's going to be in 2012. Yeah, I'm trying to think exactly. I know timeline is not really that important in the context of when I figure things out. But I know in 2012 that I had this diagram. So I hadn't actually drawn it in PowerPoint yet because I didn't know how to use PowerPoint at that time. But was until 2013 that I drew this out in PowerPoint. So 2013, I think, was when I first used PowerPoint, later in 2013. But anyway, this prophetic mirror. So the thing that we have here is we have the prophecy given in 742 BC. There's a civil war. The North and the South are Confederate. So that part of it, that's going to be in 2012, in the spring of 2012, that I understand that. And the kingship is broken, right? So that's the thing that's broken. They're not going to be a people. They're not going to be established. And then I say it's literal Israel and the literal land of Israel. And then in this mirror, we have this reverse. So we know northern Israel, paganism and papalism, these are counterfeits of the week of Christ, the earthly and heavenly ministry of Christ. These are counterfeits of the earthly sanctuary and the heavenly sanctuary. And then in 1798, the Pope's taken captive, but that's the Protestants, the false prophet, the symbol that's going to arise in 1798, as the two horned beasts of Revelation 13, with the republicanism and Protestantism as the two horns. Okay. So obviously we know there that it's not literal Israel, because we have this 2520 connects us to that event and to the 2300 days and all those things. So we have all of those other things that help us establish the 2520 for Northern Israel that evangelicals don't have, right? So they don't, and many of them, what do they do with the 70 weeks? Does anybody know what they do with the 70 weeks? Particularly the last week of the 70 weeks. They have a period of 490 years in the 70 weeks, evangelicals. The ones who misuse it. You guys know what they do? Anybody? So they're going to take the 70th week and they're going to use it. It's literal 7 years, right? So they're going to take that week. It's going to be 7 years. And they're going to have the week, just like we have a week. Our week is 7 years, but ours is going to have Christ crucified in the midst of them. They don't have Christ crucified in the midst of the week, because when they read Daniel 9, they see that it's referring to the Antichrist, right? The covenant that's confirmed is whose covenant, according to the evangelicals in Daniel chapter 9. Not all of them, but some of them. It's rather confusing how they look at this, but they're not going to apply this to, 457 BC as the starting point. Right? They're going to apply this. Some do, some don't. So there are different interpretations. But they're going to have that this is a literal period of 1,260 days prior to the secret rapture, and then another 1,260 days until the second coming, right? So they're going to deal all of this with the city and the sanctuary as referring to the city of Jerusalem and the new temple that's going to be built or something. Right? So lots of different interpretations. It's hard to keep track of all of these different interpretations. But they in some way take that week and they separate it. So they got 7 weeks, right? They're going to have that 49 years. Different people use it in different ways. Some people actually, shorten that whole period from Cyrus to Artaxerxes as being 49 years. Some do other things with it. And then if they're going to have the 62 weeks apply to Christ, that will be to the time when Jesus is crucified. But they kind of ignore the midst of the week part of it as Christ's crucifixion. And then they're going to take that 70th week and they're going to put it as in the future as these number of days for, so that's what the Revelation 12 sign prophecy was about.
Isn't that interesting how when they do that they're willing to accept a day for a year on the 70th week, but they're not willing to do that with anything else?
like with the 2300 days or other things. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, the argument they make for that is when they look at Daniel 9, uh, they actually translate this 70 weeks of years in some of the modern translations.
Right.
Okay. Now, of course, you don't see of years there, right? Just 70 weeks. And they make some different arguments for that this is explicitly is talking about 70 sabbatical cycles. But, and we understand that is a symbol, right? That is, this sabbatical cycle is based upon the week, right? The literal week. But we also have, Ezekiel, 4 verse 6 and Numbers. I always forget. I know that if I add the 4 to the, so it must be
1434.
1434. That's how I have to do it. So you have to add those together, and then you add, is it 34 or 38? Because you add the 6 to it, and then you get 44. So it'd be 38. So it should be Numbers 1438, shouldn't it be? Am I doing that wrong? So I know it's 34. So how do we do that? We add, that doesn't make sense to me. So it is 1434, but isn't there some way that we take 4 verse 6 and we add it to that? We get 1844? Or am I confused? But you know what I'm talking about? I've done something wrong. Oh, no, that doesn't make sense. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about. There was some way in which I added these two together to get 1844. Oh, no, 1840. That's it. Okay. Because, what we're doing here is we're going to have 1840 because that's when they get the year-day principle confirmed with the prophecy of Josiah. Okay, now I remember. Yeah, so I add the 6 to the 34 and add the 4 to the 14. So that gives me 1840. Okay. So that's how I'm supposed to remember it. You'd think numbers would be easy for me to remember, but it's actually just easier for me to remember a number without any sort of mental thing to remember the number, because then I have to remember the mental thing. And that's harder than just remembering the number itself. Anyway, okay. So anyway, we get these verses that give us a day for a year. And I answer that in one of my papers on Ezekiel's prophecy. I think it's in Ezekiel's prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem. And I answer the objection that people have regarding numbers because they think, well, that's a day for a year, but the other one's a year for a day, which they don't quite understand. They don't realize how the prophecy is fulfilled. So they're actually parallel exactly in how they do it, because the 40 days give them 40 years. And the 390 days, the 390 years has already begun, right? It just happens to be more near the end of it. People think it's like, I don't know. It's hard to explain people's objections why they think they're not the same. Because to me, they're just so obviously the same. Now, the other thing about this, of course, we know in both of them, they say a day to a year, a day to a year. They double it, which this, Numbers doesn't show that, and Ezekiel 4 verse 6. It shows the doubling here in the Hebrew, but you can see they don't show it in the English. And so you can see it's a sign of the covenant as well, right? So that's like the animals, 3 years old, and the turtle dove and the young pigeon, across from each other, and burning lamp and the smoking furnace move between them, right? So it's a sign of a covenant as well. Now, so I know we So if we go back to Isaiah, so we got this prophetic mirror. We have, the start of this. Then we have this prophecy, of course, the sign of Emmanuel. We have this thing about Manasseh. Manasseh is going to be born, but he's going to be a type of Christ. Right? We're going to have the king of Assyria come in, right? Then we're going to have in chapter 8 the mirror. That's this great role as a mirror, right? And then we're going to have these events that we understand are applying to the immediate events of Assyria coming in. It's going to come up to the neck. But as you go through this, we can see that it's obviously referring ultimately to end time events. So it's going to use a bunch of this language of end time events. So then my argument is, even though Isaiah isn't explicitly speaking of literal Israel, typifying spiritual Israel, in this mirror, we would see that that would have to be the case. Now, of course, we still have Daniel's prophecies that show this. We have many things in the New Testament, Paul explicitly states it. But Isaiah is hinting at it, right? He's not going to explicitly state it. We know at the end of time, if this 25:20, which is dealing with, at the beginning, literal Israel being scattered, and then it ends with nothing to do with literal Israel, but having to do with spiritual Israel, to do with the United States, then this would also apply to Judah. So, the idea that all Israel shall be saved, we know that that is talking about spiritual Israel. The argument that somehow all literal Israel would be saved would go contrary to what Paul is teaching and the Bible's teaching throughout, right? Obviously, all Israel will not be saved. It has to be spiritual. I mean, there's just so many arguments for it in other places. But this prophetic mirror, because what we're studying is this transition that, again, before the cross, spiritual, after the cross, or before the cross, literal, after the cross, spiritual, we can see that it doesn't happen in one instant of time. That is, it does, because Christ is the center of all prophecy. But we have all of these different lines that illustrate this and work out what happens over time with literal Israel and then spiritual Israel. Now, in this chart, this diagram here, we don't have the week of Christ and we don't have the 25:20 drawn out, but they are there, right? Otherwise, you can't have, here we have paganism, which is the earthly counterfeit, and then you have papalism, which is the heavenly counterfeit. So one is we have a high priest after the order of Melchizedek who is ministering in the heavenly sanctuary. He begins his work, obviously, with first the sacrifice, and then, of course, he becomes our high priest, and he ministers first the daily ministration in the holy place, and then he moves in 1844 to the most holy. And he's not working just for the Jews, right? This is for the whole world, right? He's not like he's the Jewish Messiah who is just there to save the Jews. His purpose is to save all mankind. It's really clear. And that's also has to be in the Old Testament. That is, the Old Testament is showing this, that this is universal. Because you have this local and literal, war, and it's going to be transferred over to, to Gentiles and to the United States and to all the world in the end, right? Because if it was just literal Israel, now the other argument that people have is they have this thing called the times of the Gentiles. So when we deal with the times of the Gentiles, I know I'm a little bit all over the place, but I'm just trying to tie some of these threads together. Let me see here. Well, where does the phrase times of the Gentiles come from? We have one reference to it in the Bible, that directly using that phrase, 21:24. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and the wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led captive into all nations, and the Gentiles shall be trodden, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So how do dispensationalists address this? So they use this verse, this passage. So we got Jerusalem compassed by armies. That's 70 AD. Right? They would agree with that as well. And then they talk about this reference here, where they got to flee to the mountains, they got to flee the city, and then talking about those that were with child and those that give suck in those days. That's actually dealing with the reference about them eating their own children in the siege. That's from Deuteronomy 28, so that they take that as a reference to that, which I think is correct. And then they say Jerusalem's going to be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So how are they interpreting the time of the Gentiles? What does they look at that as? So what are they implying from that? They're going to be trodden down until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So what do they infer from that?
Aren't they misusing this verse with Daniel 9:27?
Okay, yeah. So they're putting the two together. So we know that in Daniel 9:27 is going to be dealing with the destruction of the city and the sanctuary, right? In 70 AD. So they're going to put that together. So that part. So they're going to move that though over to the end of time, right? So they're not going to have that. So that's the thing that I don't understand, because they don't seem to understand typology, evangelicals generally, right? Yes, they don't understand types in the way that we do. They don't have triple application of prophecy. They can't look at talking about the destruction of Jerusalem and also connect it to the destruction of the end of the world, right? They don't see it as typological. There's some that understand it a little bit and apply it at times. But here they're just saying that the times of the Gentiles and the times in which the Gentiles exist, and then at the end of the times of the Gentiles, they're going to be secretly raptured away, right? And then, the Jews come back in again, right? Jerusalem will be rebuilt or whatever, and they're going to have this opportunity for salvation as a nation. Different variations, right? So it's kind of hard, like when the thing that I find with evangelicals on this point, because I have relatives who are of this belief, they believe multiple contradictory things at the same time. Mm-hmm. To me, it's pretty frustrating having a conversation with somebody who believes things that they can't possibly both be true, right? And I'm not sure why that is, but they will like listen to prophets. They'll like they get a pastor or something. They treat their pastors way different than we would treat a pastor. Well, Adventists are starting to lean that way, but they treat pastors almost as inspired servants of God that have spiritual authority, that they can teach doctrine that you can't, right? So you try to find a pastor who's prophesying. So they're looking for prophets. These would be the Pentecostals, dispensationalist Pentecostals. And so they will hear something from one pastor and they'll hear something from another pastor. They're not compatible, but they believe both of them, right? So anyway, they will say that there's this period of the times of the Gentiles. Now, if you look at this period of the times of the Gentiles, they don't have a prophecy that gives them a span of time. But if we understand that the times of the Gentiles are the 2:1260s, because the question is, where does this come from? Because when he's talking about the times of the Gentiles, he's not introducing to them something new. It's something that would be understood. So when we're dealing with times here, like obviously we're dealing with Greek and not Hebrew or Aramaic, right? So this can refer to quite a few different things. So it can be a measure of time, a larger or smaller portion of time, hence a fixed and definite time when things are brought to a crisis, decisive epoch, waited for, an opportune or seasonable time. So it just can mean the right time or a limited period of time, to what time brings, the state of the times, the things and the events of time. So, but we're going to say that that's analogous with the times and a half a time of Daniel 12 and Daniel 7, right? So when we talk about the times of the Gentiles, we're talking about it in that same symbolic sense. So these would be these periods of years of the Gentiles, but specifically those two added together. And also this is in a plural. Now, doesn't necessarily mean that it's referring to the 2:1260s, but that's the way that I take it, is that there are two times of the Gentiles. The first time of the Gentiles is from 723 BC to 538, and the second is from 538 to 1798. Does that seem reasonable? Or we would just say that the times just refers to the times in the sense of time times and a half, and then the other times and a half. So altogether, that's the times, right? It's still going to be 2520. It's still going to be these two 1260s added together. So whether linguistically we're referring to the times as being these two different periods of 1260 years, which I prefer, that's what Jesus is referring to. But it could be the other way. But the thing is, they don't have any prophecy that gives them this, because even when they use the 2520, well, that's not the times of the Gentiles to them, right? Maybe there are some groups that try to apply the 2520 to the times of the Gentiles in some way. But, there's no real cohesive, logical, taking everything into account, systematic, complete structure of all of these prophecies. It tends to be a bit willy-nilly. And people, don't care that they don't fit together, right? They just change their mind depending on the context. Now, we know here there shall be signs of the sun and the moon and the stars and the earth and distress of nations, with perplexity of the sea and the waves roaring, men hearts failing them for fear and looking for those things after which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Now, of course, we know that we have the destruction of Jerusalem, and then some Christians, you got preterists. Preterists will just say, well, this is just talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, has no application to the end of the world. But we can see that the transition here from what's happening with spiritual Israel going into the events that happen at the end are actually connected by the times of the Gentiles. So for Seventh-day Adventists, generally speaking, well, I would say the vast, vast majority, because we're in the 0.00001% or something, who understand that the times of the Gentiles is referring to the 2520. So when it talks about the signs of the sun and the moon and the stars, that's at the end of the 2520, right? You're going to have, right, those signs, they occur with the falling of the stars in the dark day, right? That's going to be in that period. And if we look at it in Revelation, it expands on that a little bit more, talking about the earthquake. So you got the Lisbon earthquake as well. So this is referring to the Millerite time period, right? Not actually the end of the world yet. Millerite history is the end of the world, because we've been in the end of the world since 1798, because the times of the Gentiles ended. Okay. So the times of the Gentiles is not ending when, with the secret rapture. It's a particular point in history laid out prophetically. Now, understanding the times of the Gentiles further, I think, is what we will be able to do as we go through the structure of prophetic chronology, and we deal with the different aspects of the Jewish economy. But particularly if we think about the end of the 2520 in 1798, what aspects of the Jewish economy is it addressing? This 1798 addressing when it comes to what, is it dealing with the priesthood? 1798, does that have anything to do with the priesthood?
I would say no.
Right, no. Does that have anything to do with the kingship in 1798?
Again, I would say no.
And also the sanctuaries, it's, we could say it's a period in which the sanctuary is going to be built, but it's not specifically addressing the sanctuary in 1798. But the people and the land are being addressed, right? And more specifically, the land. One of the main things that Jeff came to understand was the glorious land was not Jerusalem, and it was not the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was the United States, right? He was referenced by Dwayne Dewey to look at these series of articles called The Times of the Gentiles by Hiram Edson, right? Where he's going to show that the glorious land is the United States. And Ellen White's pretty clear that we're looking for this nation that arises in 1798. So the part that this is dealing with is the land. Now, to show this, to illustrate this more fully, I'm going to go back to one of my slides. Now, so this here is addressing Abraham. He's going to leave Ur of the Chaldees when he's 70. If we take Ellen White's 50 years that she refers to as exactly accurate. But, they go from Ur of the Chaldees, they're going to go to Haran. And when Abraham's dad dies, he's going to leave Haran, and he's going to be 75 years old. And then he's going to have Isaac, when he's 100 years old, right? And so we have all this stuff dealing with Abram. His name gets changed to Abraham. Isaac's going to have Jacob and Esau, right? All of these things. Now, we know there's a number of things that are promised to him. So he's going to be promised that he's going to get this land and that he's going to have this great nation. So these two things are often tied together. The land itself and the people that are going to come forth from his loins, right? Now, we can see that this is going to address that in fulfilling it, right? So for 215 years, they're going to be sojourning in the land of Canaan, but it's not going to be theirs. They're just sojourners, right? And then they're going to go into Egypt, 2 years into the famine, and Joseph's 2 dreams are fulfilled. And then there's going to be 215 years that they're going to before they have the Exodus. Right? So they're going to be in Egypt for 215 years. And on the self-same day, they're going to leave. And then, so there's the Exodus here. I didn't write, I could have wrote a bracket here in the 215 years. I didn't have that in other diagrams. Now, Steve and I have a bit of a disagreement about it. I'm taking just how the Jews understood the period of time from when the Exodus occurs. So they're going to have the Exodus, they're going to be 40 years in the wilderness, and then they're going to have 7 years to possess the land and 7 years to get rest from their enemies. Now, that I think is kind of an idealized period of 14 years that the Jews use, because Stephen would say that the first period is 6 years, and then we don't really have a definite way of marking the next 7 years. So the first 7 years would kind of be an inclusive count, and then the last 7 years I think is just kind of idealized. But so that would be the end of the conquest of the promised land, right? Now, in some ways, you could say they never have rest from their enemies. But that's going to be in 1479. The point is, from the death of Jacob to the conquest of the promised land is 252 years. And then from there's 3 times 252 years to 723. Now in 723, northern Israel, their king is going to be taken captive, Hoshea, right? And that's going to be the beginning of that 2 years, or sometimes called 3 years, until, they all go into captivity. But we can see that 723 begins this period of scattering, right? The pagan scattering that's going to then end in 538. And that's divided into 3 times 252 and 2 times 252. So we've gone through this before, stoning of Stephen, to the start of the 25 or to 1260 for the treading down. That's going to be 2 times 252, 504 years. Now, back in 2016, I had worked out this part of how this worked, the 504 years and so forth, and that this was 1764 years. And then Stephen said, what if you count backwards from 34 AD? Where do you go to? And we found it came to the death of Jacob, where he blesses his 12 sons. So we can see here that this is addressing both the land and the people, right? And then we would say, well, we have literal Israel here in 723, they're going to be scattered, right? Now they're going to be scattered, and the scattering is also going to affect Judah as well. But initially it starts with the scattering of northern Israel. And northern Israel is going to be scattered, and it's not going to be gathered. That is, we don't have in 1798 northern Israel literal Jews being gathered, right? So that's why people don't use 723. They want to get this to, they're going to take some much later period in here in this history that they're going to mark, right? So they're going to mark the destruction of the temple, or they're going to mark some other event. Yeah, often it's the destruction of the temple that they're going to try to work into to fit with 1948 or some other year sometimes, depending on the system they use. But you can see that this part here, what Isaiah is addressing, this is taking a lot longer than planned. I thought it'd take like 10 minutes. But you can see that Isaiah is addressing, because of the 1260s, primarily the people and the land, right? And we'll see this as we go through Isaiah on all of the different prophecies. Now, implied in that is, because there is connection obviously with the people of the land, there is a connection with the kingship, there is a connection with the priesthood. But that's not primarily Isaiah's perspective, right? Now, why is that? Why is Isaiah addressing primarily the land of Israel and the nation of Israel? I know these are sometimes kind of obtuse questions. So he's writing at a time in which northern Israel is going to be taken captive, right? And we have three different prophets that are all addressing the captivity itself. That is, their prophets. I guess we could say there's four if you include Daniel, but Isaiah, he's at the time that northern Israel is going to be taken captive, right? He's going to live through the captivity of northern Israel. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, they're going to be living through the captivity of Judah. Is the temple in northern Israel? No, right? Is the king in northern Israel? No, he's in Jerusalem. So in Isaiah, in his prophecies, when he's addressing the transition from literal to spiritual Israel, he's addressing this period of the times of the Gentiles with the two 1260s. But particularly, we can say he's going to deal with the 1260 with Judah as well. But he's there dealing with the starting point with the fall of northern Israel, right? He's going to give us that the starting point for Judah, because he's going to be talking to the king of Judah. And that's the other thing that's interesting is he's a prophet to Judah. He's going to be talking to the king of Judah, not to the king of northern Israel, because northern Israel is going to end. So he's a prophet to Judah. But yet he's at the time of the end of Israel, and he's giving this as a warning to Judah, because what's going to happen to Israel is going to happen to Judah. Now, of course, this is expanded in the other prophets. They take this and make this application, right? They say, I'm going to stretch over them this line of Samaria over the line of Jerusalem. Okay? So does that kind of make sense to understand the perspective that Isaiah has? Now, of course, he's still writing to the king of Judah in the time that northern Israel is taken captive. And he's pretty comprehensive. Now, we do have other prophets that are writing in the time of northern Israel being taken captive as well, what we call minor prophets. Okay. So they're also important. Who are the prophets that are writing in connection with that? Hosea is writing in connection with, he's earlier, right? I'm trying to think when Hosea is writing again. Do you remember, Dwight, the time span that we had for Hosea?
Not right off the top of my head.
I believe he's writing. Let me see here. It's going to say, what does it tell us? Yeah, so he's going to be there in the same time as Isaiah. Yeah, so Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So he's prophesying at the same time as Isaiah is. Okay. And then we had Joel. I don't think it tells us, but I think we infer from it that he's writing at that time that northern Israel is taken captive. Amos. So he's going to be prophesying time of Uzziah, king of Judah, in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. So he's going to be earlier. So I kind of have the feeling Joel is also earlier, because he's in Uzziah, right? So, but I think what I mean by earlier, he's earlier than Isaiah. Let me see here. That's Joel. It doesn't tell us when Joel is. It talks about the drunkards. And it talks about the nation that has teeth as a lion. So anyway, we just know that there's different prophets that are prophesying to different nations, right? Or at different, so whether they're prophesying to Judah or Israel, and they're prophesying at different times, and they're adding to what we see in Isaiah. Okay, so we're on Isaiah chapter 17. So we got this oracle concerning Damascus. Okay, so I
There's
just,
just concerning Joel, there's an Ellen White statement where she connects 2,500 years.
right, that,
I think she's referring to the dark day or something, one of them
yeah,
prophecies, or following the stars, and then you count back 2,500 years and it takes you to 721 or something. So it's really, and then when Joel says, have you not seen this in your day? You know, this is talking about, so he's prophesying, look, this is referring to the destruction of Samaria. It's just happened. Has this never been, before? Look at this. So that's what the context, the understanding there.
right. Yeah, I knew there was something about Joel. I couldn't think what it was. And of course, we should have connected that because we already read about, the sign and the sun and the moon and the stars, right? And that's from Joel, right? That's what they're referring back to. The sun shall be dark and the moon shall not give her light, whatever it is. However, it says it in Joel. Yeah. So Joel is going to be in 721. So that actually connects. Let me see here. When's the dark day? Is that the one that's, no, that is that May 19th?
1780.
Yeah, 1780. May 19th, 1780, right? Yeah, so that brings you to 721. Yeah. Which is going to be then the destruction of Samaria. And then she talks about 20 years before the end of the 1260 that persecution has wholly ceased or something like that. Anyway, it's another way of showing the 2520 for northern Israel. Okay. Yeah, so thanks for that. So that's helpful. Okay. Now we have so this burden of Damascus. Damascus is, boy, that 10 minutes went really fast. So Damascus, of course, the capital of Syria or Aram. And behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. The cities of Aurora are forsaken, they shall be for flocks, which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. The fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria. They shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. So whatever this particularly means, the implication that we discussed earlier had to do with, now it says here, this guy interprets, they shall meet with the same fate as Israel, their ally. So they're trying to look at this in a negative sense rather than a positive sense. That's Jameson, Fawcett, Brown. Again, same thing here. So I guess what they're trying to say here is that the glory of Israel is taken away. Same thing's going to happen to Damascus. Okay, so that's the way they're interpreting it. Different than what we discussed. In that day it shall come to pass that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean. So if we take that here in this sense, we can see that it has the same implication, right? So their glory, that is their pride, their honor, all those things, they're going to be brought low, right? And in that day it shall come to pass the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean, and it shall be as when the harvestman gathereth the corn and reapeth the ears with his arm, and it shall be as he that gathereth ears in the valley of Rephaim. Gleaning grapes shall be left in it, as the shaking of an olive tree. 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uppermost bough, 4 or 5 in the utmost fruit branches thereof, saith the Lord God of Israel. Now, of course, if any of you have any kind of fruit trees, often when I harvest my apple tree, this year it doesn't have many apples on it, but the hard ones are the ones way at the top of the tree. So those are going to be left. Okay. At that day shall a man look to his maker, and his eyes shall have respect to the Holy One of Israel. Now, what did we say about the Holy One here in the book of Isaiah? So he uses this phrase, Holy One. What did we say about it when we first started looking at Isaiah, with the Holy One? This is Kadosh, right? Related to Kadesh or Kodesh, right? Right? So it's related to Kadash, to be set aside, to clean, right? To dedicate, to hallow. So you got Isaiah talking about the Holy One of Israel. So when he talks about the Holy One of Israel, what is he talking about? First mentions it in Isaiah 4, verse 3. It shall come to pass, he that is left in Zion, he that remaineth in Jerusalem shall be called holy, even every one that is written among the living in Jerusalem. So there he's talking about all that are left. But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment, and God that is holy shall be sanctified. That's the same word. But you get the first one that refers to, as they translate it, as Holy One. Let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw nigh and come, that we may know of it. And this was in they that say, let him make speed and hasten his work, that we may see it. So we connected that to Mahershala Hashbaz, right? Because it uses two of those words in that name. And therefore, if we got this fire devoureth the stubble, and despise the word of the Holy One of Israel. So we take this as applying to Christ, right? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. That's Isaiah 6. The light of Israel shall be for a fire, and his Holy One for a flame, and it shall burn and devour his thorns and his briars in one day. Okay, so you're going to see that Isaiah uses this word basically one of the 30% or more of the times that it's in the Bible, it's in the book of Isaiah, right? This word Kadosh. Now, it's used sometimes to refer to things in the sanctuary, right? So often things that are, we refer to a holy nation, the holy place, right? And it's used by other prophets as well, but it's mostly in Isaiah, right? He uses it more than any other one. Okay. So in that day shall man look to his maker, and his eyes shall have respect to the Holy One of Israel. So this is a parallelism, right? So when we have a parallelism, they're saying the same thing in a different way. So the day that a man looks is the same as his eyes having respect. And the maker is the same as the Holy One of Israel. So this is a reference to Christ, or to the maker. Now the maker here, asa, that is just a word that means to make, right? So it's used then as a noun. So it's taking the verb to make, and it's just putting the er at the end, or the r at the end. Right? Now we can see that this it's used throughout. It's a pretty common word. Here, the interesting thing about this word is it's actually a verb, right? Like the way that it's written here, when we look at this Hebrew number 6213, it's done. It's a number that's normally a verb, not a noun. But if we talk about his maker, that's because of the form of the word, right? So his is just it's going to be a yod at the end of the word. They're going to actually have not a yod. They're going to put a final noon at it. What does that do with the words? That would be a different
Yeah. So it's a different, I always get this, some of these verb forms and he not always, they're not as common. So, yeah, so this would be the nifal form. So that to be made, to be produced, to be offered, to be observed, to be used, right? So that's why it has the final noon. That's the nifal form. So I'm not sure why they translated as his maker. Doesn't seem to be correct. His maker. So there must be something about the form of that word that is turning it into a noun based on the context. When they say creator, okay. So if you look up to the one who made them, their eyes will see the whole. See, that's more how I would translate it. That of his maker. Just technically, literally from the Hebrew, this would be more correct. But the idea, of course, is the creator, right? The maker. Their eyes shall see the Holy One of Israel. So the Holy One of Israel is the maker. Okay, sorry about that. Sometimes I get a little nitpicky. And he shall not look to the altars, the work of his hands, neither shall respect that which his fingers have made, either the groves or the images. In that day shall his strong cities be as a forsaken bough and an uppermost branch, which they left because of the children of Israel, and there shall be desolation. So again, this is just referring to this fruit. So when it says, that day shall be a forsaken bough and an uppermost branch which they left, that is, they didn't harvest because of the children of Israel, there shall be desolation. Because thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation and hast not been mindful of the rock of thy strength, and therefore thou shalt plant pleasant plants and shalt set it with strange slips. And in the day shalt thou make thy plant to grow, and in the morning shalt thou make thy seed to flourish. The harvest shall be a heap in the day of grief and of desperate sorrow. Woe to the multitude of many people, which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of the nations, that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. So here you have the people, the waters were peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. You can see that here in this verse, that the nations are being depicted like these rushing mighty waters. Now, of course, we put in the time of the end in our history of that 4,325 days from November 9th, 89 to 9/11, so that waters has that number. The nation shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, and they shall flee far off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the morning, or the mountains before the wind, and like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. And behold, at eventide, trouble, and before the morning, he is not. This is the portion of them that spoil us, and the lot of them that rob us. So again, this was about Damascus. And then we got Cush, which is Ethiopia. Woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, that sendeth ambassadors by the sea, even in vessels of bulrushes upon the waters, saying, Go ye swift messengers to a nation scattered and peeled, to a people terrible from their beginning. Hitherto a nation meted out and trodden down, whose land the rivers have spoiled. All the inhabitants of the world and the dwellers on earth, see ye, when he lifteth up an ensign on the mountains, and when he bloweth the trumpet, hear ye. For so the Lord said unto me, I will take rest. I will consider in my dwelling place like a clear heat upon the herbs, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. For the harvest, when the bud is perfect and the sour grape is ripening in the flower, he shall both cut off sprigs with pruning hooks and take away and cut down the branches. They shall be left together unto the fowls of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth, and the fowls shall summer upon them, and all the beasts of the earth shall winter upon them. And in that time shall the present be brought unto the Lord of hosts of the people scattered and peeled, and from a people terrible, and from their beginning hitherto a nation meted out and trodden under foot, whose land the rivers have spoiled, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, Mount Zion. Interesting. So it's kind of interesting here that they have in where they take this a nation scattered and peeled to a people terrible from the beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden down, whose land the rivers have spoiled. And then they're going to have a similar thing here. At time shall he present, shall the present here, the gift, sha'i. Okay. Be brought unto the Lord of hosts of the people scattered, peeled. So it's got this same thing. Now, what about, so they're measured out, meted out. So measured or meted. That is kav. Now, that's interesting because that's related to the word line, right? Line upon line. For this nation is meted out and trodden underfoot. So it's measured out, tav lekav, tzav letzav, kav lekav. Tzav, precept upon precept, line upon line, kav lekav. It is line to line, precept to precept, line to line. Okay, so line upon line, precept upon precept, line upon line. So we got that word here. Now it's kav. So when you just have kav, it means to mete out. That is to measure out, right? Now here they say definition might, which doesn't really make sense. Okay, so kav. So it's these two together. That's strange. Kind of. So it's like a doubling of this word. It means meted out, sense of fastening. Not sure why they have this as might here in Brown River Springs. Here they just have kav. I'm just going to look at the Hebrew here quickly. This is verse, of course, chapter 18, verse 7. So July 18. Yeah, so you can see here, see the kav. That's kof, vav. So you have kav. It's pretty interesting. So it's not line upon line, but it's very similar to that. So to measure, obviously it's a measuring line. I just don't know why they have it here as might, and then in the sense of fastening, whether that makes no sense for the Brown Driver Briggs lexicon. Okay, but we can see they're measured out and they're trodden underfoot. I mean, is this a reference to the 2520? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Or it's at least a reference to line upon line. But the treading underfoot, that's going to be Rome. So this people here, now this is an oracle concerning Cush. So Cush is Ethiopia. But it says, woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. So it doesn't seem to be talking about Ethiopia, but which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, which may be Ethiopia, but why it's couched in that language, I'm not particularly certain. Okay, so this here, shadowing with wings, this is one of the most difficult expressions in the whole chapter, and one to which as yet probably no satisfactory meaning has been applied. The Septuagint renders it, if I could read really well, oi ges loion at Peruges. The wings of the land of ships. The Chaldee, woe to the land in which they come in ships from a distant country, and whose sails are spread out as an eagle which flies upon its wings. Doesn't this sound like Rome to you? So to say it's an oracle concerning Ethiopia, it's not. It's a land that is, I'm not sure why they refer to Cush here. I'd have to think about this a little bit more. But when you look at the description, doesn't it seem like more description of Rome? I'd have to think about that. Okay, well, that's it for this week, morning studies. Any final thoughts on any of this before we close with prayer? Okay, let's pray. Now, dear gracious Heavenly Father, thank you again for things that we could discuss here this morning. We know, Lord, that there's still a lot we don't understand, but we're thankful for the light that we do have. I pray for a blessing upon each of the people that you can watch over them and help us to follow and serve you today and bring us together again to study your word is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.